Hello, goatee schoolies and possibly demons. I'm Abba here, and I'm back with a new story. Well, new video, but you probably get the point. Also, did you like the intro? It took me like 5 seconds to think about it. I'm using it already. Anyways, I've finally finished this. It took so long to make. Oh my god. Not only did I have to make this whole thing, but I also had to make a whole story to go along with it, so I hope you actually like it. By the way, the story is very open for critique. It's supposed to be a horror story, but it probably isn't very, horrifying, so if any of you have anything to say about it or some possible critiques, please keep them kind and nice. Anyways, enjoy the story. Come on, Shirley. It won't be that bad, I said as I began to enter the forest. How can a big, dark, scary forest not be that bad? She shouted at me. I turned around facing her, sighing. She was located near the edge of the forest, not daring to come in. Don't you think you're overreacting, Shirley? It's just some dumb, stupid forest. It can't even do shit to us if it tries, I said mockingly. She rolled her eyes at me and facepalmed. You fucking Nimrod! It isn't the forest, it's the things in the forest. We don't know what serial killer-esque shit is going to be in there. As soon as she said that, I groaned, rolling my eyes. Come on, Shirley. You and I know it isn't that bad. You're just too stubborn to admit it. Besides, no second-rate serial killer could even kill us. They're probably some deluded wannabe that we could drop in a heartbeat. As soon as I said that, I could practically see the frustration on her face. She then started tugging at her hair in frustration like she usually did. My lord, you're an imbecile. You know what, Max? If you want to go to the dark, scary death forest and get stuffed into a duffel bag, fine. But you are not taking me with you. After she said that, she began stomping away from the forest, practically fuming at this point. Fucking control freak, I thought, as I began to walk further into the forest. It was the middle of the night, and the barely visible moon was the only thing raining light into the forest, but it was enough. As I was strolling through, I tried to find some cool objects to show Shirley when I got back. As soon as I looked around for a bit, I had to admit, Shirley was a bit right. The forest looked creepy as all hell, with branches sticking out all around me, even towards the sky, as the trees didn't seem to end. As I continued to look around more, the silence seemed to become more loud, but I didn't let it bother me. After walking for what I'd say around a solid 30 minutes, I finally found something. It was a little run-down old shack, covered in vines and open holes as windows. I smiled, basking in pride at finally finding something. I quickly ran up, examining every detail. Unsurprisingly, the wood seemed worn down, and it barely kept the shack together. Like one good push would make it collapse in on itself. I then started looking at the vines and the plants around it, but there was nothing of interest. So I finally turned towards the door, a decrepit old place. I excitedly rubbed my hands at the prospects of all the treasures I could find. Really, anything old, vintage and old would make Shirley's mouth drop, as she loved collecting things like me. I took a couple of steps in, only to behold the treasure trove collected around me. It wasn't a lot of items, but I could practically smell the dust on them. There was a chair in the corner of the room, a broken-down desk in the other, but even though they were exciting depending on how old they were and when they were made, it couldn't compare to the holy grail resting on the wall. It was a rusty ask in a semi-perfect condition. My heart fluttered at the sight of this
beauty. So I quickly rushed over towards it, picking it off the wall. I slid my fingers across the handle and looked at the mark of the head of the axe. Quickly, I took out my phone and tried to turn it on, but it strangely didn't turn on. I paused for a moment, then tried again, but it still didn't turn on. Strange, I thought I'd charged it before I came here, I said in my head. I quickly shoved it off and started heading back outside, satisfied with what I found. Most of the time, I would have shaken the chair or the table, but looking at their size, I didn't think I'd be able to carry them back. Then I started walking back into the tree line. Then I realized something. The trees looked bigger. Much bigger. I started running forward, frightened that I had gotten lost, but as I kept running, I realized that I was now completely lost. I quickly looked around, trying to find the path I took to get out of here, but I couldn't find it. I tried to calm myself down, but it was no use. I started hyperventilating. It felt like the world was collapsing in on me. I fell to the ground, curled up into a ball. I didn't know what to do, but then I saw light glimmering through the trees. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but as it grew lighter, I had to admit that it was a reality. I quickly got up and started rushing over, thinking that it was a person. I tried calling out for help. The farther I went for the trees, the brighter the light got, until I came to a bright, open clearing with fireflies dancing around. It was bright and beautifully colorful compared to the drab, dull, dark forest. On the opposite side of the clearing was a big slate with words written on it. I collapsed to the ground with a sigh of relief. I didn't know why, but miraculously, I felt safe here. Calm, safe, and secure. As soon as I got some courage, I decided to go up and read the stone slate. Slowly, I shambled up, grasped my hands around the slate, reading it carefully. I couldn't make out what it said, as it was written gibberish, but what I did know was that I was exhausted from all the running. I slowly put my axe down and laid back onto the stone tablet. I knew I probably should have sorted things out before I went to sleep, but I didn't care about that at the moment. All I really cared about was going to sleep. So, slowly but steadily, I creeped into a deep, deep sleep. When I woke back up, I was where I was before, but things seemed a lot lighter. The forest didn't seem so dark and dreary anymore. It seemed so bright and colorful, fireflies dancing around. I quickly looked up into the sky to see what time of day it was, and it was the middle of the day. I took a sigh of relief and picked my axe back up. It felt very light and in a lot better condition. I turned back to the slate that I was resting on, and while I couldn't read it, I felt like it was smiling back at me somehow. I quickly smiled back at it and thanked it. I then started rushing back out into the forest. As I continued to walk along, it kind of felt like the fireflies were leading me somewhere. Then, as the forest started to clear out, I saw a bright and much more colorful path. It was edged with beautiful flowers, some of the prettiest I've ever seen. I had quickly rushed to it, crying tears of joy that I was finally going to leave here. As I took a step on the path, I felt a sigh of relief exhale out of me. All the fear I had built up in me before had left. I felt comforted. I then looked around and saw the way the path was heading led me back to my town. I started rushing towards it. I could practically smell the cold ice cream at my dad's shop, and the vintage smell of Shirley's room. Not to mention the nice librarian at the bookstore. Some of my favorite places. I practically cried thinking of going back to them. Then, finally, as I reached the end of the path, as it led out of the forest, I started to walk forward into town. It was getting a bit dark now, but it was fine, as I was finally back home. I quickly rushed forward. It was a bit silent as nobody was outside, or inside for that matter, but it didn't matter. As I continued down the path, I noticed that the distance was Shirley's house. It seemed that the path ended there, but it didn't matter, as that was the first place I wanted to go. I quickly rushed towards the door. At this point, some of the flowers seemed to be wilting by now, but that was normal. Since they were in the middle of town. Most flowers died here. I rushed inside. It was completely dark, as none of the lights were on, but that was fine. I mean, they weren't open on Sundays, and it was a Sunday, so I quickly sorted through the shelves where vintage items were stored to be sold. Then, finally, I reached the counter where I could see Shirley standing there. They didn't seem to see me coming, as they were looking away from me. This would be the perfect time to spook them, I thought to myself. As soon as I reached them, I grabbed their shoulder, shouting boo, giggling a bit as I lunged forward. But after grabbing them with my other hand, their head turned around fast, but to me it felt like slow motion. On their face was a toothy grin as one eye in the center of their face pierced back at me. Suddenly, my vision started blurring like the static of the TV. The next parts were choppy, like cutting to different scenes in a movie, but what I made out was the floor collapsing under me, with what was Shirley peering back at me. Or what was her. Then me falling through, with that thing still looking at me. The farther I went down, the more choppy the images got, and then complete darkness. I then woke up. I quickly gasped for air, remembering what happened in vivid detail, almost like it actually happened. I quickly looked behind me to the slate I was lying on. It was completely crumbled, and the forest around me was pitch black and dead quiet to the point where it was all... The grass and plants were all dead, and the trees, who were still towering up to the sky, had no leaves. Then I looked up towards where the moon was, well, where it should have been. There was nothing there, with no stars as well. And suddenly I felt my back heat up, almost like it was boiling, as light flooded me from behind. I slowly turned around. I had a hunch of what it was, but I didn't want to admit it. It was a stupid eyeball that the fake Shirley had, only this time it was a lot bigger. It lumbered over me like a predator was about to pounce on their prey. As it peered at me, it opened up a bit. It was smiling, only had no mouth. My eyes opened up in shock, and it quickly picked up my max. Before it could do anything to me, I dashed into the tree line, weaving and hopping over dead roots. Then I heard a gurgling laugh flood the forest. I wanted to curl up in a ball and block everything out, but I knew I had to keep running. Otherwise, who knew what it would do to me? As I kept running through the forest, it got thicker and thicker, until the point where a blockade of branches stopped me from continuing. In an instant, I raised my axe and cleaved branches off, clearing it a way through. Finally, though, I hurtled my way through more. As I continued, I started to be able to make out shapes in the tree bark. It was eyes peering towards me. I didn't want to let that bother me, though, as I had to keep running. Then, as light started to shoot out from the tree line behind me, the trees started to clear out into a huge, clear area, marked by stone tablets dotting the field. This time, though, instead of gibberish, it was eyes. I quickly rushed and clambered over each and every one of them. If I could, I would have hidden behind one of them, but none of them were big enough to hide behind. Finally, though, in the middle of the field was a big enough slate to hide behind, and it didn't seem to have an eyeball marked on it. I rushed over and clambered over it just in time to where the eyeball that had followed me didn't catch me in its sight. I crouched into a ball and held my mouth, trying not to cry. I held my breath, hoping it wouldn't hear me. Slowly, though, it floated over towards me, staring directly at the slate. This was the end, wasn't it?
Fucking cringe. Oh my god, I want to cry. It's so fucking bad. I fucking hate it. I mean, it's kind of a decent, good first attempt. Not good, it's trash. Don't get me wrong. Like, I know this thing's trash. It's so bad. It is so bad. But, it took so long to write it, so I can't leave it out. Anyways, don't forget to like and subscribe, I guess, and hit the notification button for when I'm uploading new videos, because I'm gonna upload this hopefully better. Hopefully better. Anyways, bye!